So, hey, everybody, it's 1 o'clock, so we'll try to get started. It's because we live on a university campus. It means that sometimes it's on student time, so we'll probably have some people joining as we start. I just wanted to first introduce myself. I'm Michael Goldberg. I'm our executive director for the Veale Institute of Entrepreneurship. And a professor at the Weatherford School of Management. It's really awesome to welcome Dr. Liz back to campus. We just got to have lunch today. It was funny. Sometimes you feel like you're seeing an old friend. We were meeting in person for the first time today, but as I'm sure you will, those of you who know Liz or will meeting for the first time, she is such a warm, incredible presence. We've met for the first time, and Zane is going to be our student moderator today, wearing our hats with the Case Western Reserve University Alumni Venture Fund, which is a small student-run fund where we put investments in awesome alums, student startups, and spin-outs. So our friend Tony Peoples introduced us to Liz, and we're right on the verge of becoming investors in the company, which we're super excited about. So thanks everybody for joining. If you're on Zoom, and I know we're gonna have some people joining in a few minutes here, if you have a question, we're gonna turn it over to Zane, who will moderate the discussion. Kind of after about 20-25 minutes, we'll open it up for discussion. So if you're on Zoom, put your question in the chat. If you're on LinkedIn and you're watching, put your question in the comments, and then I'll take a look and I can join in. And then obviously if you're here in the room at ThinkBox, you can just raise your old-fashioned hand and participate. So with that, Liz, thanks for joining today. Zane, thanks for moderating, and I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks everyone. Nice to meet you all. My name is Zane. I am one of the fourth-year medical students here at Case Western Reserve University, applying for residency right now, and I will be moderating the discussion today with Dr. Clayborne. And as Michael already mentioned briefly, I mean, Dr. Clayborne has a kind of wide range of accomplishments, including founding NasaClip, which we'll get into, of course, being an assistant professor of emergency medicine at the University of Maryland, and many, many more things. So Dr. Clayborne, if you wanted to give like a brief introduction to yourself, then we can go from there.
Sure. So you guys can all call me Liz. I am so excited to be back here on Case's campus. I had a really amazing time yesterday, thanks to Tony Peoples, and like retouring the medical school campus, which has completely changed since I was a student here and graduated in 2011. And it was really, I think, awesome for me to reflect on what I was like at that time as a, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed medical student who was just looking forward to starting my career in medicine. And I don't think I could have ever imagined that I'd be returning now as a founder, entrepreneur, someone who has raised significant money to bring a new medical device to market. And I also think that for me, a lot of the story that I'll share with you as being a physician innovator, a Black female founder, and a mom doc is important to me because I think that, the example that I can serve for other physician innovators of the future, for other, women and people of color who want to pursue this, and for the evolving ecosystem of investors is something that I would like to lead by example and like really show them that, interesting and innovative ideas and products come from every background. And I'm just excited that I have a unique story that I think will resonate with a lot of people.
Awesome, yeah. And kind of touching on your background a little bit, before we get into NasaClip itself, like, can you tell me a little bit about how you think maybe your upbringing or, your educational background, whatever it may be, kind of pushed you into kind of where you are right now, and maybe even more specifically, getting into innovation, as a physician?
Yeah, and I was reflecting on this because I've been asked a lot because I have a pretty atypical career, especially for a physician. And, I'm born and raised in Denver, Colorado. I'm the eldest of 4 girls. So like true to form being an eldest daughter, I was definitely the like straight and narrow, hardworking, academically achieving child that was putting mostly pressure on myself to excel academically in those early years. But I, from the very beginning, I think had parents who always encouraged me to, first of all, believe that I could do anything I wanted, that there were no limits on what I could do. And that if I really wanted to do something, that I could just put my mind to it and achieve that. And so the earliest example of that in maybe like my younger years is I actually kicked on our football team. Which is a little known fact. I went to a 5A football team, and in Colorado, the season for female soccer was in the spring and male soccer was in the fall. So they could never really convince the male soccer players who might kick as like a place kicker to like give up their soccer season to be on the football team. But for me, I was off season and they knew from my soccer that I could score from midfield. So they're like, would you be interested in being a place kicker? And I was like, I guess. But it gave me this very unique, you can imagine, right? Like 16-year-old, it was my junior and senior year, being on an all-male football team and like the things that I learned and the things that were shared on the field and when we were traveling were really interesting. But that's just a small example of how I was always willing to take kind of small risks and do something that was different, but really paid off and was beneficial in the end, because that conditioning to a very heavily male-dominated industry certainly made me feel comfortable anytime I was in that environment in the future, and really understanding how it's helpful for guys, whether or not, people articulate that or not, and also how my differences probably made me, strong in that environment. And then I went on, and for undergrad, I went to Duke University. I'm really excited that they're participating today and supporting me. And that, when I was at Duke, I again had this an example of doing things that were atypical. I went in with the understanding that I did want to be pre-med, so that was an early, decision for me. But I thought I was going to be biomedical engineering, and I just did not love the engineering classes the way that I thought. And I took a random course in the religion department as a freshman, really liked it. And so what I decided to do is a program 2 at Duke, which is where you design your own major. So I actually graduated from Duke with a major in medical ethics and religion. And what it really allowed me to do is use all the sciences that I really needed to take to be qualified to apply for medical school, but then also explore, I think, the more human side of medicine, which set me up, I think, to be a physician that always was able to look at a human and not a disease process when I'm taking care of my patients. And that was a very early conscious decision. And so that flowed very naturally to me, also doing atypical things. I did 2 years of research fellowship at NIH in the National Human Genome Research Institute before I went to medical school, lived in DC, fell in love with the DMV area of, being close to the nation's capital, understanding that, politics does not escape anything and that it's actually involved in everything that we do in healthcare research, science, like, where the dollars are spent. And I think that was helpful for me to understand, because sometimes when you're going to be a physician, you want to say, well, I'm just taking care of my patient and it's just that interaction. And we all know that that's not true. Like, the system you practice in heavily influences how you're able to care for patients and what you can do for them. And so after I took that time and really solidified my decision to go to medical school, Case was a very natural decision for me to apply, because they were one of the 4 universities in the country that had a dual MD, MA of bioethics degree opportunity. And so one of the reasons I ended up coming to Case, in addition to loving it and coming here and meeting, people like the awesome faculty I have, Dr. Robert Haney's here, who was one of my favorite faculty members when I was in medical school. I really resonated with the type of student and the faculty was at Case, but they also had this special program where I could complete a master's in bioethics within the 4 years that I was in medical school. So it was a little bit weird writing philosophy-like papers while I was a medical student. But again, I think it bounced me, right? I was like always bouncing between the left and right brain dominance that's required to do that type of work. And it always kind of grounded me in understanding the big picture that I wanted to approach. And so I'll wrap this up because I know I'm talking a lot, but this is how we're getting there. So then when I got to residency, I was interested in health policy. I went to GW for residency in DC, absolutely loved it. Did a lot of work in the end-of-life care, health disparities. And in my 4th year, I just was annoyed really with the number of people that kept showing up to the ER with nosebleeds. And I just could not believe that we see basically 500,000 ER visits a year for nosebleeds. So that's about 0.5% of visits, or 1 in 200 ER visits. And so when I first encountered this problem, I was just like, put pressure on your nose. Like, why would you come and wait hours to see a physician like me over such a simple problem? And here is where I think all of that background and all that history led up to a very different path that I decided to take, because there are a lot of physicians who encounter problems that they think we can do, maybe have a better solution for it. And maybe they even have an idea of how to treat that, but then they don't necessarily know steps to take that idea from something that's in their head to fruition. And so for me, the journey of NasaClip is I saw this problem, I saw a need, and I had an idea of how to better treat patients in the department and outside of the hospital space. That is a simple device that provides external nasal compression with intranasal sponges that can be medicated, that are sized for adults and kids. And I was like, you know what? I think that this is a good idea. I'm going to explore it a little more, and I'm going to see if there's real teeth to this. Now, because in all of that history you saw, there's no business background, right? There's no prior interest in entrepreneurship. I knew there were some gaps in my knowledge. So what I did is I just looked to my environment, and fortunately at GW at the time, they had a Center for Innovation, and they supported like an interdisciplinary opportunity similar to what you guys do here for students at every different academic level to kind of participate in innovation and entrepreneurship. And there was a business planning competition. So I applied to that, got into the finals, and through that process had to learn how to put together a business plan, understand my market, and what would be needed to kind of bring a product like mine to the market and what that introduction would look like. And then from there, it became very clear that I was going to have to raise money. And I think the other differentiating factor is that didn't scare me, right? Because I already had this history of choosing and doing things that were not typical. And so it seemed very natural for me that even though this is not what I imagined to do with my career, I was going to walk through this open door. And I'm so glad I did, because now, as you can see, we have a product on the market. I've raised $3.5 million for this company, and I expect to build $1 billion brand that will be the Band-Aid of Nose.
That is amazing. And I think it's also very clear where your whole, I mean, the holistic background you kind of have, both upbringing, education, being a kicker on the football team, all kind of come into play and really set you up to be where you are right now today. And so I think even as a segue to NasaClip, then you talk a little bit, I know you mentioned it slightly, but a little bit more about kind of NasaClip specifically and what makes it unique and kind of, where you see NasaClip right now, and then where you do see it heading in the future, as a Band-Aid for nosebleeds.
Yeah, so the frustration with nosebleeds, if you talk to any emergency physician, is that the reason most patients show up to the ER is because they're mismanaging their nosebleed at home. So instinctively, people, I don't know why, well, I guess I understand why. When you're bleeding, you want to put your head back, right? Because there's blood coming out. But putting your head back just causes you to swallow blood, you get nauseous. So really, when you have a nosebleed, you're actually supposed to put your head forward. So that's one of the first things that people do. They also pinch up here a lot on their nasal bridge. I don't really know why that happens. That does not help you. You need to pinch over the flare of your nostril tightly for 10 to 20 minutes. And while that sounds simple, nobody holds their nose for 10 to 20 minutes without letting go a little bit. And then if you combine that with the fact that nosebleeds are most common in kids 2 to 10, and then older adults 55 to 80, they're really the least likely population to manage it well. So I think what happens is people panic because they're not treating the nosebleed correctly and then it's still bleeding. They don't know what else to do, so they show up to the ER. And when they get there, they're like, I'm bleeding, it's an emergency, you need to see me now. But for me, as a busy ER doc, this is a lower acuity patient, right? I'm like, unless you just got shot or you're having a heart attack, like you have to wait. And the frustration was I had no good tools to give patients while they waited. And in residency, I was taught that you could take 2 tongue depressors and like tape them together. And I'm like, okay. I was like, but how is there not a device for this? Why am I MacGyvering together tongue depressors? We have devices for everything. There must be a solution for nosebleeds because most of these patients would not need to be here. So that's how I designed NasaClip. It has these intranasal sponges that can be medicated. They can carry medications like Afrin or oxymetazoline. It also works without medication. So if you were having a nosebleed, you'd simply clear your nose of clot, insert the nasal sponge, rotate it into place, and pinch shut. And just like that, you can see my mouth's clear, my eyes are clear, I can relax a little bit. I leave it in place 10 to 20 minutes. I might put the patient back out in the waiting room even, and then I have them come back, release the clip, and check for bleeding. This device can be rinsed and reinserted. It's the current device that we've had on the market for the last year. And in the hospital space, we actually package with a device to stop your nosebleed, and then you go home with one, which is great, right? Because now you're happy, you have a solution at home, you don't bounce back. It helps with a lot of the metrics we deal with in emergency medicine. But once I had the device, I got feedback when we first introduced it to the market that patients loved it, but they were taking the sponges off and reusing this component. And they were like, can you make it reusable? Also, colleagues from sports medicine were saying, I'd love to be able to return an athlete to play, but this has metal in it. Like, is there a way for you to engineer around the metal? And so this is where really understanding your different channels and like who might be interested in using your device, because I designed it right from my pain point as an ER doc, but we were now discovering all these different channels, school nurses, sports medicine, travel and event medicine, right? So Disney picked us up last year. We're on all Disney cruise ships and parks. They reordered a number of times, and it makes sense, right? The demographic that gets on cruise, young families, older adults. Nobody wants blood around other folks on a cruise ship. Airlines is another, segment we're looking at. Small confined space, when you're on elevation and driving sick of the air. All these things I didn't think about, but now I'm trying to contemplate how can I modify the device to make it even more useful. So we're really excited that this is our new reusable version of the device that's launching on Amazon in a couple of weeks. where you have the same component of a sponge and external compression, but this is all plastic device. And you would insert it in your nose and then slide it into place, and it fits tight and snug, so it'd be on an athlete that might be running around. And then when you're done, you can disassemble the device, the sponges come off, this component can be reused, and you can buy a sponge refill. So now that adds a lot more utility to maybe a chronic bleeder or a mom that has a kid that might be a frequent nosebleeder. And so that's the first iteration that I'm really excited about. And the second one is because I still practice clinically, I do about 5 shifts a month in the ER, where I think the really most exciting future for NasaClip is that I wanted medication on the sponges because I knew it was helpful in the setting of nosebleeds. But once I had the device, I was like, it's actually really good at deploying any intranasal med. And so immediately an example that came to mind of other intranasal meds that the device could be used for is Narcan or naloxone, the opioid reversal agent. And I knew as an ER doc, when we have, drug overdose patients, they were having to be redosed multiple times by police, fire, bystanders. And sometimes that was happening because when you spray the medication up the nose, it washes out, you don't get great absorption, but you can imagine putting a medication on a sponge inside the nose that maintains contact with the mucosa, and then you put that system under pressure, more likely to have, better absorption. So we're just finished applying for funding from NIDA, the National Institutes on Drug Abuse, to look at NasaClip as a more effective way to deliver intranasal Narcan and, hopefully save lives. But from a business perspective, that also opens up a $43 billion drug delivery market, because now we're looking at other medications like benzodiazepines, analgesic meds, migraine, allergy, epinephrine, and even vaccines that we deliver intranasally. So it continues to evolve. I don't know what other ideas I'll have next, but I think just those two are really exciting because I certainly see a path forward for an acquisition in the future if we have great data when it comes to the drug delivery.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm gonna have a couple more questions before I'm gonna open it up to the general audience, but kind of touching on the future of NasaClip as well. Do you think this is something like, in terms of looking at an exit, like, is this something where you think, you might want to be a, serial entrepreneur and like after NasaClip kind of go on and found other things as a physician innovator? Or is NasaClip something that you kind of want to keep as your baby kind of forever?
Yeah.
What's kind of the thought on that?
Yeah, I get asked this a lot, and even though this is definitely my baby, and it's been with me for a long time, because it was way back in 2015 that I first thought about it, and then I didn't raise money until 2020, and we launched really in 2024. So it's been a long journey. What I want to achieve with NasaClip is to make it a ubiquitous medical product, and I'm going to take whatever steps are necessary to have the technology reach the world globally, which usually means that, we're going to have to partner with somebody who can help that happen. And so I think it's more likely that we would go down an acquisition pathway. But I'm not married to, one thing. Like I mentioned, from my background, I'm used to, making decisions when I have great information in front of me and weighing all the options and seeing what works well. I think what I would actually be most interested in is having a very successful exit, because the other part of my story that's important to illustrate is that as a Black female founder in a space that is very hard to raise money, either as a Black founder or a female founder, because we're still only giving about 2% of venture capital to women, I'd like to show a blockbuster exit to show the capacity and really the ability for founders like myself to be successful, and what that signals to the investor community. And then also, because I'll then have a little bit of, pocket change once we exit, it would actually put me in the position to then invest in other women and people of color, as well as physician innovators, to kind of continue that legacy. And I do quite a bit of public speaking, and it's something that I think that I would like to speak on in the future. So that's, what I'm probably more leaning towards, but we'll see. There's a lot of unknown variables.
Mm-hmm. And that's a beautiful kind of segue into my last question before I open it up. But being a minority kind of in this space where you're trying to raise money, I think a lot of us are aware of the challenges. You talk about 2% of the money, only going to certain minority groups. What has your experience been in this space? Like, has it been maybe as challenging as you thought? Have you faced certain challenges you perhaps didn't expect?
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious on kind of your experience.
Yeah, and so what I like to do to illustrate the landscape when it comes to raising money as a Black female is to give you numbers, right? Because I think you can esoterically talk about how it's harder to raise money as a woman, or it's harder to raise money as a minority. But if you want to look at the data, there is the 2% of venture capital. But the way that I break that down in a way that I think gives you a good insight into the uphill challenges associated with raising money is that On average, a white male founder, when they're raising capital, has to speak to maybe 7 contacts to get a yes or a return on investment. A Black female founder needs to speak to 70 contacts, 10 times that amount, 70 people to get 1 yes. And that's the statistic. Now, I think my personal story has not been quite that challenging. First, because I was able to utilize a lot of my physician network. So even in my early rounds, when I had convertible notes, I was able to tap physicians who were accredited investors to come in and invest in me. And also because I think that I come off as a competent, and very directed founder, and I think that that is protective in any environment. People are going to pick up on that. And early stage of investing, a lot of times they're betting on the jockey instead of the horse, because they're like, yeah, the technology seems good, we think it might work, and you always have the chance that it may not, but they really are betting like, I think Liz can take this all the way. And so I think that I communicate that well. And so for me, instead of always looking at it as a challenge, I've also looked at it as a benefit. So because it was more challenging for me to raise money and I had to do a lot more work, I think it also helped me understand which investor communities I should go to. The hardening, or I should say resilience, that comes from hearing no so many times, also I think gives you the ability to ride the up and downs of building a company, because there's lots of ups and downs. Some people tell me that there's only 2 states of emotional being when you're a startup founder, which is like being completely elated and excited, and then tear. And it does feel like that. It's like, it feels like, oh, we're doing so well. And like, oh my God, I'm like, we're about to die. It's like that all the time. And so if I was someone who couldn't deal with that kind of emotional strife, I don't think I would have made it this far. And the resilience I built because I had to work harder, because of my background, actually just made me better at my job. So in some ways, I'm grateful for the challenge. It's sharpened my edge and it's allowed me to maneuver to where I am today.
Wow, I mean, that's awesome. I think it's an amazing perspective to have, and especially given now, I think we see people from, all backgrounds, pursuing their own companies, trying to raise money. It's very important to kind of have that piece of advice out there. So I'm really happy you even mentioned like wanting to be a future public speaker on this topic.
Absolutely.
That's amazing to hear. But at this point, I did kind of want to open the room up and see if anyone else had questions for Liz. So
It'd be great, Ed, when you jump in, if you can introduce yourself as well.
First guy, my name is Jarvis. I'm a senior undergraduate student in engineering, a BME in biomedical engineering and electrical engineering. And I am very interested in the reimbursement arena for medical device. And then I see a lot of changes especially in this past 4 years. And one thing that I talked to a lot of people, I realized that in the healthcare system in the hospital, different departments and different power in terms of buying medical device. And I really like your product because you're building it in a very simple way, cost efficient at the same time. Especially it will be so helpful in the ER department because ER in general is the most busy, the most heavy workload spot in the entire healthcare system. My question is, how the reimbursement strategy looks like in generally speaking in ER? Yeah.
So what's really interesting is that they don't train you at all in medical school about understanding any of the reimbursement structure. In fact, I don't actually think we get good training on our healthcare structure. Most people don't understand like why we have the healthcare structure in the United States that we do compared to the majority of the developed world that has universal healthcare. And for me, I had to actually kind of really dig in to understand like the reimbursement structure specifically for nosebleeds and what that looked like, because to your point, when I'm like pitching this to a hospital, I need to show the value that it's not just that it's giving good high quality care to patients, but like that I'm affecting the bottom line of that department in that hospital. And so interestingly for epistaxis or nosebleeds, it's a global flat fee reimbursement, which I didn't know until I looked into it, meaning like when you go to the ER for a nosebleed, that hospital will get paid basically a flat fee to take care of a patient, regardless of what they do. So if they take a lot of time and they use a lot of resources to do it, there is no pass-through billing. So let's say, a physician doesn't have NasaClip and they, tell the patient to pinch their nose, it's not working, so they pack them with a device, like a nasal tamponade device, which can be pretty expensive. The hospital's eating that cost.
Yeah.
And they're eating that time of that physician. Their goal is to really be able to provide high quality care that takes less time and costs fewer resources. And so that's what I knew NasaClip could provide, because I knew for them, they were like, we don't want to have to use these more expensive devices. We'd like something that can be utilized more effectively and in less time. And so the big thing for me was also that this is an OTC device. So because it's over the counter, a nurse or a tech can apply it right when the patient checks in. So it speeds up their time to disposition, makes it more likely they're getting out of the hospital in less time, and you're using less of my time, which was really by design because, again, as I mentioned, ER docs really don't like dealing with nosebleeds. So if I have something where it's like a triage nurse pops this on when the patient comes in, and I'm really just coming in 20 minutes later to talk to them, bless them, make sure nothing more serious is going on, and send them out the door. That's a win for everybody, right? Because the nurse had something she could do instead of telling them to wait. The patient got treated immediately and then was able to be discharged faster. And then I was able to focus on probably, more high acuity patients. And then the hospital was able to get more adequately reimbursed by using fewer resources and less time. But I do point out that for those who are interested, either coming from an engineering background, a medical background, or any of the other sciences, you should understand the business of the area you're going into, because that is how the decision will be made. And that's also how you should decide on which channels are most sustainable for you. So I'm glad that you already understand that will serve you well in the future, regardless of what kind of innovation you get into.
Thanks. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was wondering if you could talk.
Introduce yourself.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I'm Amos. I'm a senior at Case. I'm studying mechanical engineering. I'm also in the alumni venture fund, the Zane. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, once you had the idea for the NasaClip, how did you start prototyping it? And then, once you had a prototype you were pretty happy with, how did you take that to like the scale production where you are now and find a manufacturer and all that type of stuff?
Yeah, that's really challenging because I had no idea how I was going to do it. So I did tap the resources both at GW, and then when I joined faculty at University of Maryland, they also had an Office of Technology Transfer. And you have to really get into the ecosystem of the startup culture. And what's nice in Baltimore, where we're based, is they actually have a very vibrant and I would say robust startup culture for med tech and life science. And there were a couple of organizations that I was referred to through University of Maryland that did these early prototyping. And so I worked with one who did our initial 3D printing, because it was, really literally me saying, okay, this is what I think it should do. I did have an example. I told them that I had seen kayakers have this clip called kayak clip that they put on their nose when they're in the kayak so that water doesn't go up their nose when they're flipping around. I was like, it's kind of gonna look like this, but then I need the base to be like wider below the nostrils and the sponges to be able to go in, and it has to be adjustable so it doesn't maintain just one pressure. So I worked kind of in that way, and so they were able to put together some things, and then I moved on to working with Harbor Designs and Manufacturing, who's our current manufacturing partner, and that's exactly what they do. Like, they take innovations, they have an engineering team that will do CAD drawings and then look at materials that you need. But it is a much more sophisticated process when you get something that works. I mean, like the early stages of this, it took a very long time for us to find the correct metal. This first one is a memory metal. It's an aluminum alloy mix. It had to be anodized and then overmolded with silicone. I know way too much about like all of these, different materials, where they come from, how much they cost, who can do this, who can color it, who can make sure that it's like safe and appropriate, meeting the regulatory standards. But this was really expensive, the way that we were doing this, right? Because we had to like find the wire, source the wire, bend it, overmold it. And I'm like, we need a more efficient way to make the device. And then that was the same time we got the feedback that we wanted to be reusable. So moving to plastic injection molding is easier, but I still had to have like I was like, do we need to use silicone? Can we use another material? Where can we get that from? And then you also have to be mindful of like our geopolitical state, right? So we were having some pieces come out of China. I'm trying to move away from that now just because of the concern with tariffs. And, as you scale up, things do get cheaper, but for you to do that, you have to grow your business at that time. So in the very beginning, I was making very small batches, so they were very expensive. And you always want to weigh, like, am I making a high quality product that works? that will sell, that then enables me to then make the product cheaper, but still maintain the quality. So it's more of an iterative process. Once we had our initial prototypes, to be honest, I actually just sent them to all of my family members and friends and investors and like told them to tell me what the fit looks like. And then if I had frequent nosebleeders, I would ask for their feedback. So I did get, it was a little bit more of an iterative process with that, where it's like, they were like, well, like we played a lot with the diameter of the pinch pad. So that like it sealed the nostril but didn't overrun onto the face, and then like the flexibility. It was really just getting, user feedback. And I think that's why you always kind of will be developing, the super type A, perfectionist in me is always like, oh my gosh, like this is not exactly where I want it to be. But, you will learn as a founder with any kind of, physical product, it is never going to be perfect. And if you don't launch, like you won't get the most important feedback. So you eventually just have to decide to pull the trigger and put it on the market. And then, look at the first iPhone or the first of anything, right? It's not gonna be what it eventually evolves into. So you have to get over that fear and just be like, we're gonna go with this, and then we'll get feedback.
Awesome.
Hello, and yes, my name is Sam. I'm an assistant professor of operations management in Finland, Aalto University, and also a founder. But very interesting story. And also, you mentioned the challenges, mainly with regard to design and also fundraising. But what was the other important challenge that you faced? Because it's a multifaceted, very long journey with so many different things that you need to educate yourself. Your finances needs to be in place, your design needs to be in place, your production needs to be in place, the technicality, the certification, everything needs to come in line in order for you to get something on the table. So basically, which part of it was the most challenging in this journey?
I would say actually the hardest part was just maintaining my personal life and taking care of the two children that I have while I was building this. So I was a full-time clinician and academic doc when I was working on this. And I knew that I needed to spend more time, working on NasaClip if it was gonna go anywhere, but I also like had to pay the mortgage. And I actually went through a divorce while I was building this company. So I became a single parent and was dealing with a lot of challenges at home. And I had to make sure I could still, put food on the table and take care of the basics, but then make room. So in the beginning, it's really, you're sleep deprived. And I was basically working two full-time jobs. And then as I got momentum and I was able to fundraise, my clinical hours came down so that I could have more time. And then that also gave me more funding to get help, right? I had to start building my team because in the beginning it was just really me and my initial co-founders that were really minority co-founders. So it was really just me. But then as we got more funding, that's where we were able to, bring on a director of operations, somebody for marketing, and then have more flexibility with our engineering team. But it doesn't happen overnight, right? For me to raise that money, I had to do it while I was working as a full-time ER doc, being a single mom, and, just trying to like get through life. So I think the hardest part for me was always making sure I was grounded and taking wellness seriously. And I talked to the medical students this week when I was at Case about how any career that you're going into, you need to make sure that you are doing things that nurture yourself and stabilize, your wellness plan, whatever that's going to be. Because it is a marathon, not a sprint. And so you cannot say like, oh, things will be better when, or I will enjoy life when I'm done with this exam, when I'm, when I have like this certification, when the product, launches on Amazon, like everything's gonna be better. There'll always be another mountain to climb. So you gotta make sure that first of all, you're enjoying life along the way. So I took time to make sure, I didn't stop and interrupt my life. And also that's the example I wanna serve to my daughters. And I see how important that is. Like, they certainly think that I work a lot and I travel, but they're also so proud of me, right? Their mom's a CEO, she's a physician. And a good example I have of this is my eldest daughter, Ada, who's 6, she's in kindergarten. She was asking me like maybe a few months ago, she's like, Mommy, can boys be doctors? Because like in her mind, like this is a girl job, okay, which is amazing, right? When you think about like the history of this profession and where we're going, like for someone to think like it may or may not be possible for boys to do it, this, and I get it. I'm a physician. A lot of my female friends are physicians. Her pediatrician is also a woman, and she has all these examples. But it seemed like a girl job to her, and I really want them both to feel like they could do anything they wanted. But I don't want them to look at it as like, you're not happy and you're not loving me, and you're not taking time and you're not enjoying life because you're doing this thing. I think she is interested potentially in becoming a physician, or she actually says she wants to be a scientist. And I think that she is also seeing that I will be supportive of whatever she wants to do, but I'm gonna demand that she's happy while she does it.
That's I'm Monty Pettis, marketing director for an industrial manufacturing company in Texas. So my question would be more on the marketing end of things. Do you have an idea what your balance would be? I know you say you're gonna launch on Amazon as far as when it comes to the consumer market and versus, ER.
Yeah,
doctor
B2B.
facilities. Do you have a balance with that?
Yeah, well, so we have some predictions, and it was interesting because in my early investors, people felt really strongly about my go-to-market approach. And what we did is we actually did quite a bit of customer discovery before we launched into market to understand what that beachhead market should be and what our breakdown for B2B versus B2C, so business to consumer versus business to business. And when we did customer discovery, and one of the things I did for that was the National Science Foundation I-Core, which I highly recommend, by the way, to all the budding entrepreneurs out there. Before you pour your blood, sweat, and tears into something that you think is fabulous, you need to validate that you have a reasonable product market fit, and then somebody's going to pay money for the thing that you're making. And so the way you do that is you go out to where the problem is and you ask, like, what are they currently doing? What are their challenges with that? So when we had talked to moms, coaches, pharmacists, doctors, and said, like, what do you do for nosebleeds now? Why do you do that? Who told you to do that? Most people were saying that a healthcare professional or like trusted family member is who told them what to do for nosebleeds. So it was very clear to us that we needed to establish the reputation of this being a go-to solution for nosebleed emergencies in the medical community, because that was what was influencing and informing the consumer community. Now, you can go direct to the consumer, but that is expensive. It requires a lot of marketing and education, because most people are probably just knowing that for a nosebleed, you're pinching your nose with maybe tissue, like they're comparing us to tissue. A lot of people don't know there's any solutions specific to nosebleeds on the market, let alone this one. So it's a lot easier to influence that consumer market when it's given to you in an ER, or the school nurse puts it on your kid, or a coach is using it, or you're, on a Disney cruise and that's what they use. That's going to influence your behavior at home. So we specifically were targeting in our first year of sales basically just B2B. We had our e-commerce site live, and you can go to NasaClip.com, by the way, even now, and buy your NasaClip. But we didn't heavily invest in paid advertising or marketing on that piece. Now that Amazon's launching, we are expecting to have a little bit more focus on B2B, but we think the breakup will probably still stay about 35% consumer, 65% B2B. And it's really because B2B is where your recurring revenue comes in, your larger contracts. And then we expect that actually it'll be that B2B growth that feeds the B2C growth. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that you have some minority co-founders. Obviously, I mean, it seems like you had a really successful contract-based product development and manufacturing process. What was, I guess, the decision-making that went into, bringing on co-founders, giving them equity, versus, outsourcing, to like contractors, parts of the business?
Yeah, so my two co-founders were actually just the folks who were with me at the very beginning. So my primary co-founder is Veale Patel. He's actually also has an engineering background, and he was an undergrad at GW when I was in residency. And my attending, Dr. Neil Sicca, my emergency medicine attending, who actually was the one who told me to pursue the business plan competition, had been participating in the GW Innovation Center and had actually served as a CMO for some other residents and physicians who had startups. So he introduced me to Veale, and it was like the three of us in the beginning who were really putting all the work in. And so they are very deserving of like the co-founding title, because they were there from the beginning, putting in the sweat equity before we raised any dollars. And then Veale, fortunately for me, went on to have an amazing career where he did some work with venture capital. He actually went to business school first, then worked in venture capital, had specific work on some CPG goods that really informed our strategy for NasaClip. So he's always been there, and he actually serves currently as our CFO. So I will share, because I've seen this kill a lot of startups. You do need to be really mindful of who your like core startup team is. It's very much like a marriage, and I've seen things go left. And so we also did make sure in the very beginning, when we set up our legal structure, that there was a clear understanding of equity in the beginning, decision-making power, and what was gonna happen moving forward. But fortunately, I've had like really a pretty flawless relationship with my two co-founders, and Dr. Sick is really busy, so he doesn't, participate as actively, but has always been supportive from the beginning. But Ramil and I like have been vibing since 2015, and I feel really fortunate that I have him, because I have not seen all founders be, blessed the way that I am, in the sense that I got someone who works really well with me and has continued to help me grow the company. But yes, you need to make sure you have your legal documents established and have a good, corporate attorney in the beginning that's like setting up the structure so that as you bring on investors, everyone knows what they're getting and where that decision-making power lies.
Gotcha. We have a Zoom, let me do the Zoom question, then we'll go to Alvisa. Miriam, I don't know if you're able to come off mute or if you want me to ask your question.
Yes, hello. I am Miriam Facina. I am a sophomore here at Case, and I'm studying computer science and business management. And I was curious to know what your most valuable lesson that you think is from the start of your entrepreneurial career till now.
Yeah, I would say that the resounding lesson is that you have to have belief in self if you expect anyone else to believe in you. Like, a lot of people have asked me, like, how have you been able to raise $3.5 million? And I think it's because I do a really good job of showing other people that I believe in this product, this business, and its opportunity, because I actually believe in it myself. So I guess it's twofold. It's like, I believe in myself, but I also do a good job communicating that. But it's almost like it's a nonverbal communication that you're making. And if you don't have good belief in self, you will not be able to bring anyone along in your journey. And so that usually means that, you really have to take the time to understand, like, why am I doing this? Do I enjoy it? Am I passionate about it? Is it something that lights a fire under me? And I think that those were all yeses for me. And if they weren't, then I would need to have the courage to move or pivot to someone else, because regardless of how far I might think I can push that, I think eventually people will catch on when you're not a true believer in yourself.
Thank you. Alvisa.
Hi, I'm Alvisa. I'm a computer science and economics major, currently a sophomore. And I was just wondering, are you worried that like more copycats are gonna emerge once you launch your product on Amazon?
Yeah, like Amazon is always risky because, I mean, there's companies that just sit and try to find Amazon products that they can copy. So, our IP, our intellectual property is tight. I think we have very strong IP, utility design patents on multiple iterations of the device, both design and utility patents. But like, patents only take you so far, right? Like, if someone encroaches on your IP, you have to like pursue them legally. Most of the time you can't do that, it's expensive. So I think actually the most protective thing to any kind of design like this is to actually just hit the ground running and have good market share and brand recognition. We also do things with our packaging that are harder to copy, because you want people to like want the NasaClip, not the like generic form of NasaClip. The engineering has actually been more complicated than I would like. So it's not going to be quite as easy as someone might think to copy our design, because it has taken us a long time to perfect this, and then we keep improving it. But I always tell people that, you obviously want to have the basics covered with your intellectual property. Outside of that though, having brand recognition and market share is actually the most protective to copycats, because they're going to pop up regardless.
Jump into from reimbursement to manufacturing right now. I went to you probably know it, the MD&M West in Los Angeles 2 weeks ago, the manufacturing
Oh,
show.
yes, yeah. Mhm.
Yes, I just went there alone, and then I just meet people, understanding that the entire manufacturing process have like the automation of it, the ready to manufacture of it, the assembling of it, and then funny enough, I found a Taiwanese company that does injection molding.
Oh,
And then,
okay.
and then I saw a couple like places, especially in Guatemala right now, they're trying to do like a manufacturing hub specifically for medical device, also injection molding. So can you like, you probably don't have the answer right now, but maybe later, but do you have an idea of the inventory if you want to move out the pieces of manufacturing chain from
Mhm.
China?
Mhm.
Like, because when you move the entire process that I just described to another country, it takes some time to move it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, happy to talk to you, interested in your contacts for sure. I'm always looking for places that they think can, do the manufacturing at efficiency and scale that we plan to grow to. And then can kind of work with everything else. It's helpful in devices like this if you can find a place that can do everything, but it's usually not plausible for everyone to do everything well. I think for us, like there's the plastic injection molded piece, the medical grade foam was actually the hardest thing for us to source, but I'm still looking actually for die cutters now that I know where I can get that, bulk and die cutting means like stamping the foam into this particular shape. And then the packaging piece. And so we have good partners for all that, but part of the job for my director of operations, Chris Smith Purnell this year, is really focused on getting redundancy in my supply chain and also always looking for other, manufacturing partners who could potentially, be more efficient, especially at scale, because they're also looking at like how they could automate the process for manufacturing. Because right now, these are actually assembled by hand. And that's the most important component of my COGS is that I get the plastic pieces like pretty cheap, we get the foam, but then it's a human being putting it together, putting them in the boxes. And you usually have to do that at small scale, but like when you scale up, that gets automated and machines do it. And so I need definitely partners who are able to do that. So you can make an introduction. I'm happy to talk to you. I'll make sure you
I
get
still
my
have business
contact.
card in my bag.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is King David. I'm a sophomore here studying neuroscience and business. My question is just, where do you see the future of NasaClips going from here to, the next 5-10 years? And like, what other products do you think you can extract from this one right here?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell because initially it was just the nosebleed treatment device. I actually had other ideas that are mentioned in my patent. Like I also wanted there to be a self-adhesive ice pack that goes on the face. So that's something I could pursue. I also had a way to like capture blood in like a bib that was specific. So there were like some adjuncts to treating nosebleeds I was interested in that we haven't explored. But the drug delivery platform piece like came to me later, like after we were fully in development of this. I think that is where, there's really significant opportunity for growth in the future, because if this proves to be a more effective, efficient way to deliver intranasal meds, and there are a lot of them, I think that has like profound impact in several spaces. And a lot of people are looking for opportunities in either resource poor places because they don't have needles or they can't have medical professionals deploy things intramuscularly or intravenously, or with a pediatric population, right? We don't like, stabbing kids with needles. So anything we can do that's less invasive is helpful. I think that the pharmaceutical companies will be really interested in that technology, which is why, when Zane asked me earlier, I was like, I think we're probably more on a path for acquisition. And I actually think that path would fall in that potential like 5 to 7 year range. It could happen faster. I'm actually approached not infrequently about my IP now and a buyout at this stage. So it's really about, how far we want to take it and what the trade-off is of like putting more capital in to grow the revenue to get a better exit or a bigger exit versus, letting someone who's interested early on. So we'll keep, like thinking about it, but I still do about 5 shifts a month in the ER, which is maybe too many. I'm trying to get down to 2 to 3, but that is really where all my good ideas come from, right? So I don't want to throw that away and not, practice clinically anymore. I also spent a significant portion of my life, training to be a physician. So it's kind of nice to, use that. And, I actually love, taking care of patients. It keeps my ear to the streets and it keeps me humble. And it also puts me in the trenches of the ED where we have a lot of problems. So I probably will find more problems and come up with more solutions.
Thank you.
Bob Haney, I think the big is going to be delivery of medication. I just think they have this in restaurants that have epi in them. So if there's an allergic reaction and you don't have the EpiPen, because a lot of times you don't carry the EpiPen, it can actually be in a restaurant where you can put those clips in that is bathed with epinephrine. And where you're buying time until we get actually injectable.
Right.
And I have it in all restaurants.
Mm-hmm. I like where your head's at, Dr. Haney.
Good afternoon, wonderful presentation. My name is Albert Ferreira. I am a second-year doctoral student at the Weatherhead School, but I also wear another hat. I'm the director of telehealth at Metro Health here in Cleveland. So I'm looking at this from 2 sides. What you mentioned, your $3.5 billion investment. where do you need to spend those dollars and cents and gather resources to get you to that point where you can grow the company and potentially exit and also maybe become profitable? Or do you foresee another round of funding somewhere down the road to get you to whatever is next for you?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to not have to go in for more funding, but because we're not quite at, anywhere close to where we need to be for profitability, it's likely we're gonna need to do Series A. So we're wrapping up our seed round right now, which is a $4 million raise. So I've raised 3.5 million total since inception, but of the seed round, I've closed about 2.5 of that. So there's another $1.5 million that I'm raising right now. There's actually an opportunity for everyone to invest on wefunder.com. So you guys can go to wefunder.com/NasaClip, and anyone can invest as little as $100 if you want to have some equity in NasaClip, which is great. So we have that going on, and then we're still taking kind of institutional checks. That remaining 1.5 is really going to be largely dedicated to our marketing and sales team. And we have a target goal of 1.5 million this year in revenue. I think we can do at least $1 million, but selling to large organizations like Metro, where I did like many rotations in the ED there is important. I think even in telehealth, there's an opportunity there because a lot of times you guys are, you're trying to you're trying to see if you can safely keep people at home and not have to seek out, additional, health resources. So if they have an opportunity to give them an OTC device that's going to avoid a visit, and I'm thinking of patients that you might have calling in who are on chemotherapy and drop their platelets, and it's dangerous, right, for them to have to come in unnecessarily to a healthcare setting, or folks with bleeding disorders, or people on blood thinners often get a lot of bloody noses. This is something they can recommend to the patient population. So my big focus now is certainly getting more contracts with large IDNs or hospital networks, right, that have reach. So like while I'm here, definitely trying to seek out contacts at Cleveland Clinic, University Hospital, and Metro Health. And then also our kind of other channels that I mentioned with schools, sports medicine, travel, and event medicine. Exit wise, usually an exit is based off a multiple of revenue in general. I would love to see us in the tens of millions of revenue before we would consider an exit. Like if I want my $1 billion exit, right, you can see where I would probably need to be. That a device in this space might be anywhere from a 6 to 8x revenue. So I kind of work backwards to like what my goal would be based on the exit multiple that I would like to have. But again, I'm not married to anything. I think that really what I'd like is to just right now, this next year, focus on getting more recurring revenue, more take up and participation in healthcare organizations so that we can get that brand awareness and then really get the revenue dollars rolling on both the B2B as well as the consumer side.
Oh, sorry.
Does anybody besides Jarvis have a question?
I'm a very greedy person. Yeah, so
All
sorry.
right, last question from Jarvis.
All right, so are you thinking about concentrating your sales into B2B in the state of all right now, or B2C?
So we're definitely always focused B2B. That was the decision we made after doing all the discovery. I talked about the customer discovery and the interviews during NSF. So that's strategic because that's where people are usually learning how to treat nosebleeds. So when we have good participation from our B2B channels in healthcare in particular, it will influence the B2C market. I think the B2C market is potentially bigger, right? Like you can look, we know from our data research that 1/3 of US households has at least one member with chronic recurrent nosebleeds. So you can look at most US households with kids, and especially those with chronic bleeders, probably want to have something like NasaClip on hand. But the money that it would take to educate, market, and sell to that is expensive. So the better way to get there is have their pediatrician recommend it, right? Have their school nurse use it. And those are all more B2B plays. So that's why we're focused. But it'll be a mix. Like someone else asked me, the breakup I think will be like 65% B2B, 35% B2C. So 35% consumer.
Cool, thanks.
Well, thank you so much. I think this is, really informative for us all and everyone on Zoom and LinkedIn as well. And, I think we're all really grateful for you to like come back to Case Western and, continue to, keep in contact with us because I know we have like a lot of people who are aspiring entrepreneurs and innovators here. And I think this conversation will be really helpful for everyone. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.